Pause. Silence. Let's reconvene in person again to reconnect, to tell our stories, to listen, to disarm ourselves of preconceived notions, to reframe, to reflect, to unplug. Welcome to #Unplugged22. Take a victory lap. High five a friend. This is your moment, our moment. Together, we unplug to connect again and remember why we started. Let's evaluate our community and our digital impact as quality conversations rooted in context. We're about real connections that translate into real-life action. Brought to you by Jam Lab Africa and the Civic Tech Innovation Network.
Hello. Good afternoon. For some of you, good very early morning. A warm welcome to Civic Tech Innovation Forum 2022. As you heard, co-hosted with Jam Fest, right? So thank you so much for joining us from all around the continent, from the rest of the world for this year's forum. This time, as you saw, provocatively themed #Unplugged. My name is Geci Karuri-Sebina, and I have the great honor of serving as organizer for the CTIN, and I'll be facilitating this afternoon's panel. Our panel is titled The Funding and Support Environment for African Innovation Ecosystems, and it's a roundtable. So I have to acknowledge and appreciate of this panel. So Stan, on behalf of Luminate, please accept the appreciation. We're really excited to have this group. So what we want to do with this Founders Roundtable today is to dial into a very important aspect of the civic tech innovation ecosystem, that of funding and sponsorship, and to hear about key directions and priorities in the funding environment and the implications that these might have for our civic tech field and our information ecosystems for social innovation in Africa. So just this morning, we had a fantastic conversation by Halfdan Lange, where we heard from civic techies from North, South, East, and West about their environments and their challenges as they seek to advance democratic participation and innovate on some of the civic challenges that Africa is grappling with today. And in that conversation, next to politics, maybe even more than politics, was the issue of funding and sustainability that kept coming up. And it's really, therefore, understandably, a burning issue for us. But at the same time, we know that our friends in the foundation space, in the donor space, in the development space, have also been thinking about these issues, and a number of them have actually been updating their Africa strategies with some level of focus on how they see the issues around data and healthy innovation ecosystems, information ecosystems, and how they would want to see digital innovations leveraged towards the public good. So we're interested in seeing how we can understand a little bit about what those shifts might be. We are also keen to hear a little bit of advice, if you want, from those who hold that space that might be beneficial to us. So we've invited this selection of funders and supporters who've been willing to give their time to share and to engage with our community about their perspectives around digital and data innovation. We hope to get their advice, and they will lead with their thoughts, their organizational thoughts, in some cases, their individual thoughts and insights. We just wish to remind everybody that this is not about pitching to these funders. This is also not about roasting these funders, even though roasts have become very popular these days. I think they've kindly made the time to be with us, so let's see how we can gain insight to inform our efforts. Let's also use this space for productive, generative engagement. And if we have useful messaging to send back, if they're willing, let's do that as well. So that's what we're up to today. I welcome you, and we want to get right into it. I just have to cover a couple of short housekeeping matters. Most importantly, please engage. There's a chat function on the right side of your screen. You can drop comments, share relevant resources, and engage with each other. But please do use the Q&A function, also located there, to post your questions to the panel. You can also upvote each other's questions if those interest you. If there's time, there is a raise hand function that you can also use to voice in, but that's really time dependent. And of course, please share and tweet today's conversation on social media using the hashtags hashtag CTIF2020 and hashtag unplugged. Just so you're aware, the session is also being recorded and will be publicly available on various digital platforms in different formats. So I think that's all the housekeeping. Let's get into our talk. So joining me on the panel today are Stan Getui, Hawa, Claudia, Juech, and Leon Hemkemeyer. And what I'd like to do, rather than sort of introduce them all at the same time, is maybe just go around in roundtable style, just do very brief intros of each. I think we can all sort of use our search engines to find out more. But just to allow you to each just come in, tell us a little bit about what you actually do in this space, and then give us your leading thoughts on what's happening in that landscape and what you think those of us on the other side should be noticing. So Stan, if I can come to you first. Getui is a director at Luminate based in Nairobi. He's involved with sourcing and managing their grants across Africa, and his specializations over the years, from what I could make from the bio, are really across a number of very, different institutions and countries around issues of development finance, financial inclusion, investment for development, and ICTs. Stan, please tell us a bit about what you've been doing so what your outlook is on the changing landscape.
Thank you, Geci. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, thanks.
Pleasure to meet you all, and I'm honored to share this panel with my fellow funders. As Geci mentioned, I'm based in Nairobi, a director with Luminate. We are part of the media group. I'm one of those strange people within the organization who joined when we were part of the media network that did a lot of the initial investments in civic tech, not just in Africa, but across the globe. I've been with the team for about 4.5 years now. During that time, done a lot of investments and grant making in civic tech, and then investigative journalism, and broadly in the information ecosystem. As Geci mentioned, a few of us have been going through strategic reviews in the last year or so. We launched our new strategy about 2 or 3 months ago. We, again, limited resourcing, but also a need to get a bit more clarity about impact, decided to focus the areas we were working in. So going forward, we'll be doing mainly work in information ecosystems, which is looking to increase the supply of accurate information, create spaces for public debate, but also counter the spread of misinformation in many of our spaces. And that is with a view to create a space for people to be able to participate a lot better in civic and political life, but also create space for them to challenge power and dissent. I know dissent has a fairly strong connotation in the African context. We struggled to find a word that was a bit more balanced, but that's where we ended up. So yeah, the two main things are participation and dissent, and between that we see information as a critical piece that allows people to engage. I'll speak a bit more about tech and the role we see that playing further down the piece. But yes, pleasure to be here, and nice to meet you all again.
Thanks, Stan. I actually like the word dissent, so I hope we'll get to hear a bit more about that. And I'm sure there's lots of people here who are benefiting from that kind of support. But yes, we'll definitely come back for more. Next, if I could invite Hawa Ba. Hawa is the head of the Senegal Country Office for the Open Society Initiative for West Africa, OSIWA. And from what I could make out, she has a wide range of interests around governance processes, migration, religion, gender, media, and social movements. I see you're an anthropologist, which is really cool, because often I feel like when we're in tech conversations, we all tend to be very tech heavy and perhaps missing some of the social dimensions. So wonderful to have you. Please, you're welcome. Hawa, we can't hear you yet. You could just unmute.
Sorry. So thank you, my fellow panelists, and thank you to our audience. Good morning, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be with you, and I'm excited about the conversation ahead. And I will just start by actually updating my role, and you will understand why. I am the head of Division Participation and Expression for Open Society Africa. Open Society Africa is a new entity as part of our global transformation, where we have collapsed our 5 entities that were on the continent, our regional foundations, a national foundation in South Africa, and our regional office into one Open Society Africa with an Africa-wide strategy. And this is started. I had just started this new role, and you will also actually this is very relevant as part of the conversation when you talk about strategies that donors have on the continent, and also maybe just coming back to my areas of work. What I'm going to do moving forward is very much in line, is amplifying and scaling up and taking it to the continental level of what I've been doing. Beyond my or within my country work and my West Africa focus work. So, I did lots of work around civic tech, innovation, media, art and culture for social change, and in line with our open society goals. But moving forward, as I said, we have an Africa strategy that I can maybe come back on to later in the conversation. But info democracy, technology for good, technology for democracy ranks high in that strategy.
Thank you so much. So definitely seems well timed to hear about how this new strategy will affect positively, I'm sure, the work of people across the regions. Thank you so much, Hawa, and you're welcome. Next up, I would just like to welcome to the floor Claudia Juech. Now, Claudia is now an independent advisor who is helping with social impact organizations getting ready for the future. But until very recently, Claudia was the vice president of Data and Society at the PJ McGovern Foundation in the US. She has an information science background and a long experience in philanthropy and leading futures and data-driven programs and operations around the world. Really glad to have you at a very early hour, Claudia, but glad you can be here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Geci, and great to be here with everyone. Yes, I'm based in Silicon Valley in California, so I'm on the other end of the earth. I've been in philanthropy for about 15 years. 5 of those I've spent in areas connected to data and data technology. I was the founding CEO of the Cloudera Foundation and then at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. And what those roles both included was that it was not, those were not only grant-making roles, but roles where the teams provided technical assistance to nonprofit organizations to help them advance their data use and their use of data technology. And so that's part of what I'm hoping to bring to today's conversation, as well as because of where I'm located right now, and kind of my past history starting out at the Rockefeller Foundation. I've basically in the data space seen more traditional foundations such as Rockefeller and others, as well as corporate foundations. And this is clearly an area, especially in the data space, where in-kind contributions and grant making are often blended. And that's probably also one of the topics that will come up. Thank you, Geci.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and I have no doubt that's going to come up. So thank you very much for that. Finally, we've got Leon, who is the head of programs at the European Partnership for Democracy, which I'm sure he'll tell us a bit more about. I think he's mentioned before that their role is a bit different from that of just a funder. But Leon has experience across a number of contexts, across Africa and Europe, and his fields of interest, at least in background, appear to be around political science, democratization, social transformation, and also evaluation. Good to have you here, Leon. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Geci, for the introduction and the invitation, and welcome to all the participants. Happy to be here. Yes, like Geci said, I represent the European Partnership for Democracy. We are a network of now 19 European democracy support organizations. So they all work in different fields with media, with civil society organizations, parliaments, political parties. So we really cover, let's say, the broad spectrum of what democracy support is and can do around the world. And we represent those organizations in Brussels. So that's where we base. based. That's where we are based in Belgium. I myself am based in Germany, but we act on a global scale, let's say. Like Geci had pointed out, we are not primarily a funder. We're a bit in a in-between spot at the moment. I mean, we do still also fundraise for our organizations, our projects and programs as well, but we've recently managed 2 larger projects and programs where we also act as a grant-making organization. And so that's a bit on what I will bring in today, this sort of in-between role. We do focus heavily on the European Union as a donor, so I'll also be speaking a bit about that and what the EU maybe sees for civic tech or doesn't see. So that's a bit of my expertise, and then also what civic tech means to the democracy support community and, let's say, more traditional democracy supporters around the world. So yeah, happy to speak more on that later on.
Leon, I think we're definitely looking forward to that. Okay, so I think we can get our panel on stage. And what I'll do is just go around maybe with a few prompts to each of you just to follow up on some of the issues you've introduced. And as I also said in the pre-chat, I also welcome you to each other if you'd like. And I think as we go through audience, please feel free to capture your questions. I'll maybe just go back around in the order we started and come back to you, Stan. You've talked about Luminate's new strategy, and you promised to tell us a little bit more about the role of tech or civic tech in this new strategy around participation, dissent, and building healthy information ecosystems. Could you tell us a bit more about that? And I think you know that all of us are very keen to know, because you all have been really foundational in stimulating a lot of what we know to be civic tech today. So we're very keen to hear what these shifts are.
Thanks again, Geci. A bit more pressure now that you mentioned we've been foundational in many of these spaces, but I'll try and live up to that reputation. I think it's important to speak about what got us to where we are today. So when we were part of the media network, we were part of a group called the Governance and Citizen Engagement, which was a mouthful. We've gotten some feedback about the name Luminate, but today is less about the name, more about the work. And we did a lot of work in civic tech and gov tech. A lot of that was building platforms, increasing supply of technology in many of the spaces where we were. Then a few things happened over the last, I'd say about maybe 5 years. We've had COVID. We've had a lot of protests across the globe that emphasized and showed the power that people still have. We did a lot of work in just purely in platforms like technology. But over the last few years, we've come to appreciate the role that people and processes play in those spaces. So we got into a point where we now see technology as neutral, which was not the case maybe about 10 years ago. And with the work that we're doing going forward and promoting democracy, allowing people to participate better in civic and political life, we appreciate that technology can both enhance democracy, but also hinder democracy. I'll speak about the positive pieces first. When you think about participation, we've seen the role of platforms, the role of technology maybe in the last 2 years, especially with COVID, in giving space for people to speak, to participate, to engage better with their governments. And that, I think, remains quite critical. Again, we used to do a lot of work in media funding. We've also seen the role of technology in increasing dissemination, giving access to people who are previously uncovered. A huge focus of a new strategy as well is working with people who've been underrepresented. There's a lot of narrative by GSMA and many other players about mobile penetration in Africa, I think a lot of people now have more access to tech and information than they did before. So we see that as a fuel for the work that we're doing in independent media, in investigative journalism, to increase the supply, but also ease the access these people have to that accurate information. There's also the role of the platforms and digital spaces in public debate, evidenced by the virtual panel we're having today. We see this playing a magnified role in many of the spaces where we're funding. I think I'll pause there on the positive elements. On the pieces around hindering, we moved from the 1950s where propaganda was a massive thing controlled by governments to a space now where digital platforms are I wouldn't say uncontrolled, but they're fairly open space. We've seen in many election cycles, not just in Africa, but in other spaces like the US and Western Europe, that the platforms play a fairly pervasive role in the spread of misinformation and disinformation. That influences the way that people make decisions. So some of the work that we'll be doing going forward will be to counter that through lobbying, through advocacy, and hopefully getting regulation in place that is supportive of those platforms to ensure they play a positive role in the spaces where we are. So yeah, we see tech as a bit more neutral now. We'll be playing both sides of the field in funding more of the things that enhance participation, but also doing our bit to counter some of the harms that we're seeing in digital spaces. I'll pause there for now.
And maybe just to push a bit further on that one, I'm sure as you've been going through this strategy, and this is not a loaded question, it's actually a very honest, innocent question. Are you seeing that the organizations you've been working with share that consciousness, that awareness that there are these growing challenges, or are you finding that there are new actors who have to be brought into the conversations?
That's not a tricky one, but I think it's a question more of language. And we learned that a lot during our strategy. CTIN is a network. We see CTIN as an ecosystem builder. Maybe 5 years ago, this would be purely focused on civic tech. But you look at the people in the room today, the work you guys have done in many of the spaces. You have media actors, you have civic tech actors, you have lawyers who do public interest work. You have groups who are doing litigation on data ecosystems. So it's more the ecosystem piece, and we will take the view of funding organizations that add to those ecosystems. I think we used to fund in fairly narrow silos. So you'd have groups that are just purely media, some that are doing work in data and digital rights, some that do work in civic technology. But it's also the acceptance evidenced by some of the other funders on this table that the language we speak is unique to us, but not reflective of the work that people will do. So it's not a mishmash, but I think we've evolved over time. And the organizations that we work with, the ones we funded and some of those who haven't funded, I think have evolved quite well to respond to many of those spaces. So yeah, I don't think it changes much, but they're a lot more responsive than we are. I always say that we facilitate, we don't do the work, and we have a lot of empathy for the groups that we fund. So our role is to ensure that we can give them support that allows them to do their work. And for a long time, we've been a core funder, not a program or project funder. So we funded teams, we funded strategies who had a clear sense for what impact they wanted to see. It's really hard to see what that will be in 3 years' time. We hope that the teams are responsible with the resources they have and the privilege that we all have in this space to do work which is supportive of the environment that we're active in. I think examples are, I can mention some names like Open Cities Lab that have done some amazing work on a platform called My Candidate. That was not driven by our funding, but they saw the lack of accurate information in many of the spaces where we're working on people running for office. So just the provision of a list of candidates at governor level in Kenya, president, MP, and giving people access to that information was amazing because people had that on their hands on a really low-tech platform. So it wasn't fancy. It had links to Wikipedia pages and other platforms. But people who check fairly quickly who's running for office, check their backgrounds, and then have access to Twitter to engage in a conversation about those people. And that has been immense. So again, that was the evolution over time and in response to things that were happening in Kenya and the lack of information. So I think we're still in that funny place 2.5 months in about whether we maintain the core funding elements or whether we're a bit more prescriptive about how we fund. But we're quite open to taking feedback. The unfortunate thing is that we learn through funding, and that takes maybe another cycle or so. But we're hoping that people like yourselves will continue being honest and pushing us and giving us quite pointed feedback about what's working and what's working and what's not working as we go forward with the new strategy. And another thing I'll mention is that we used to speak a lot about impact. We're a bit more balanced now with a big focus on learning. So much as we are focusing less on pure civic tech, a lot of the work that the media network Luminate has funded has been critical to the learning in those spaces, and we still see that as something which is critical. So I think a bit more time reflecting, seeing what hasn't worked as well to inform future funding cycles is something that we'll be doing quite keenly. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Dan. That's actually, I've never heard that before. We learn through funding. That sounds really cool. Thanks for that. Okay, so maybe speaking of evolution, Hawa, you were also talking about the evolution that OSF has gone through. And I think you were mentioning that whereas there's still this focus on sort of participation and expression, you still see that as intersecting with technology. It'd be great to hear sort of what the new strategy is looking like.
Maybe or also just give you some broad lines of, I assume that people know, or our audience know, who OSF is, which might not be the case. So OSF is, or let's say Open Society Africa. We are part of a global foundation, and we work on advancing democratic governance, human rights, and socioeconomic development for more just and inclusive societies. And in that work, we have been long, supporting civic tech, innovation hubs are as actually channels for advancing some of the issues we are working on, especially in terms of elections. We have done lots of work using civic tech, supporting innovation labs. I think there are quite a few of them on the continent that have been that have gone supported OSIWA, or our foundations on the continent are supported and doing lots of work about around social accountability issues, working with communities to harness the power of community of technology for innovative solutions with regard to challenges the society are facing in the economic, in the democratic, but also in the justice sector. So what our transformation actually has been about is when we look at our continent, when we look at our issues we are facing, we realize that wherever you look at on the continent, issues are basically the same. They might manifest the same or different way, but they are the same. The root causes are the same. It's about inequalities. It's about poor governance, and it's about lack of accountability and of mechanism for demanding for better governance and for accountable governance. And we saw that also we are in a world that is changing rapidly, and the issues we are facing on the continent are very much related to the one globally. You look at climate change, you look at rising of authoritarianism, you look at the misinformation, disinformation issues, you look at issues around hate speech, digital repression, etc. It's the same. So we thought that it's better to approach these questions in a more Pan-African way, in the way that we infuse building solid networks, but also building learning platforms across the continent. So partners can learn from one another, but also can learn from strengths and gains that have been obtained in some part of of the region. And we recrafted kind of our strategies around 4 overarching goals. One being participation and expression, and where actually what the info democracy work, the participation issues on the civic engagement seats. And then another one being opportunity equity, where much of our economic justice work will fall. Accountability and justice, and then security and rights, because of all the security issues we have, or insecurity issues we have on the continent. And in that meets some of key issues actually that are driving our work is really looking at today how shrinking civic spaces are approached and are worked on. And then I will zero in on civic text and technology. I think our work intersect a lot with what Stan talked about regarding Luminate. So how can we foster, how can we build, and how can we push for where technology is good for for democracy and for society, and how can we address today's the challenges that technology is posing to democracy, to equalities, but also to other perennial issues. And we are putting a lot of emphasis on yes, access to issues around access to digital, but how can we take our partners? We have the feeling that there is a disconnect between the civic tech that itself and the other elements of the ecosystem working around the enabling environment. How can we build a platform of integrity, or a community of integrity around safeguarding spaces, around making sure that the technology is not causing harm, the resistant aspect on it, and how can we ensure that, we create a conducive environment for users, in terms of data privacy, in terms of digital interference, in terms of platform accountabilities. So all these issues, will zero into actually making the spaces safe for citizens, and then making technology work for democracy to deliver on better socioeconomic lives. So I think I'll pause there.
And maybe if I could just ask a quick one. So Hawa, is this framing of the technology piece, do you see it as a significant shift from your previous course? I mean, obviously you were organized differently. Is the framing, in your view, specifically different?
Yes, because we were not like in our previous strategy, we were not saying the same kinds of threats to open society. Threats to open society used to be about authoritarian regimes, about repression of politically, about repression, about shrink of space in different ways. Today, the threats we have to democracy are very enshrined in the way information and tech ecosystem is working. You look at issues around misinformation, disinformation. We have seen it during COVID. I think the peak we had was during COVID. We see it in different. The digital interference, the surveillance is more sophisticated than ever. And you have very powerful global players that are, at play. And not any single state even, and not even talk about, any civil society organization or can tackle those. And in our strategy, we think that we need to actually join forces in a way that we can tackle those. Look, for instance, platform accountability, is a key issue. We see how today, we have platforms that are more powerful than states, and that can impact our lives in a way that we have no control on. Australia can sue Facebook, and ask for adjustment, for reparation, for whatever. And I'm not seeing any single African state that can do it today, because we don't have the same leverage, So how can we leverage then our different forces on the continent, coming from the same, technology sector? How can we have a community of tech users and a community of enablers who can actually coalesce with states, with civil society organization to make more demand on accountability mechanism. How can we? The other element, maybe another example I can take is repressive laws. around technology, around platform, around internet, around, our states tend to take very, very a repressive approach. When you face misinformation issues, the easy solutions is to resort to censorship. The easy solutions is to resort to limiting access. While that might not be the way to go about it, it's about public education. It's about making sure we have equitable access. It's about making sure that content is driven from communities, and in a way that we have agency in that content, in a way that you foster auto regulation mechanisms by the community of users, but not forcing regulations that, instead of expanding, instead of liberating, instead of creating an enabling environment for tech to deliver for good, it's more that would go towards restricting, because we're not talking about restricting, but we are talking about making sure technology works for good governance, for equitable development, for more climate sensitive, for less harm for women, less harm for gender non-conforming, etc., etc. And for that to happen, you need to foster that agency, but also you need to make sure that you have a community of learning, of practice that create enablers for room for technology for good.
Thank you so much, Hawa. I really appreciate that. And maybe it's a good segue to you, Leon, because well, you'll tell us about EPD, but I know in a lot of the EU approaches around support in the space, it's been around this sort of democratic values, and we have seen, as Hawa's really expressing, a lot of challenges, maybe even backsliding around the world, not only in Africa, around some of these issues. What is it that you are doing, and maybe also learning about the roles that tech can play in being more enabling and enhancing, as how I was expressing, rather than impeding rights and participation and democracy?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, let me maybe start with the democratic backsliding. This has been something that has defined, I think, the work that we as the democratic support community have worked with in recent years. There's been numerous approaches and strategies that have been developed to counter the closing of democratic space. And I say democratic also because there's often lots of speak about civic space, but from our perspective, it's much more than just civil societies, but it belongs to political parties as well, to political movements and so on. So we like to rather frame it as a democratic space. One of the key strategies for us, I mean, there's multiple. It could be protest, it could be sort of awareness raising, it could be finding sort of global alliances. One of the key strategies that we've tried to highlight in our strategies and also in our projects is the worth of alliances among domestic actors, where if there's a detectable closing of space, where there's maybe a law that's introduced that significantly reduces the freedom of expression, then civil society may notice this, but you need powerful alliances and powerful comrades, if you will, in different sectors of society, including within the parliament, if that's still possible, including opposition movements when that's still possible, to work on this particular phenomenon together. And this is where I now link to civic tech, because for us, civic tech is one of those actors as well. For us, we don't necessarily see civic tech as the solution for democratic backsliding. I think it can be one of the puzzle pieces, and therefore it's very important to always see civic tech as one among many, and to find the specific uses of a civic tech solution, let's say, within that context. Right now, we are, as I mentioned initially, working on two or three, three actually, projects that have a significant civic tech focus. In one of them, it's called the African Union Civic Tech Fund, financed by the German Development Agency. We've given a number of grants that were also present throughout this week and this program to 14 civic initiatives. And one of them, for example, in Mali is Amnesty International, and they're building a sort of online monitor of human rights abuses. So, for example, such a tool can be very useful for others to use, to identify, to have this information available. I liked what Stan said initially, that information is really the connector between participation and dissent. And once you go from that participation angle and to the dissent angle, the type of civic tech solution also changes. So this monitoring human rights abuses can be also used, for example, in partnership with national human rights commissions or so on. But it also can be used then, if the space keeps on closing and closing, to mobilize international support and to use it for sort of advocacy at the global level. So there's different uses depending on how closed the space already is, and depending on that, how civic tech initiatives should situate themselves. But the key point for us, just to bring it back to that, is really building alliances. And when we maybe come to speak a bit more about sustainability of civic tech initiatives, I'll also come back to that point later on.
Thank you so much. You said 3 projects. I heard you mention one. Are the others of a similar approach? It's a similar tactic, this idea of investing in a piece that takes an ecosystem view as well. If I heard you correctly.
It differs a bit. I mean, the one that I mentioned was very much designed as a grant system, because that's also what the donor, the GIZ, together with the sort of owners and the counterparts in the African Union, wanted to do. In another project that's financed by the European Union, we again focus on citizen participation vis-a-vis the African Union governance architecture. So there's a number of AU organs, the Pan-African Parliament, the Commission in Banjul, the APRM, and so all these different organs that together built this African governance architecture. They obviously are somewhat further away from citizens and everyday needs, and so civic tech for that purpose can be a connector between citizens. And it's called the Charter Project Africa. There's the name giver is the sort of key policy document for democratic governance at the African Union level, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. And for us, civic tech is one of the ways that we try to promote the Charter, promote the usage of sort of digital engagement and innovative methods to connect citizens and the African Union. And so that's very much focused on civic tech. That's a key component. But I'll give just another example on where we as democracy support practitioners integrate civic tech, which is a project in Morocco that's focused on access to information, where the key method behind the project is one of policy dialogue. So bringing together public authorities with civil societies, including those from the region. And here we brought in a partner that has civic tech expertise and that builds a tool to assess to what degree access of information requests have been sort of addressed by the government. And so this feeds into the dialogue and feeds into the work, the more traditional work that we do with the Parliament, and that a partner of ours does in that same project, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. And so that's what we try frequently to do, to integrate civic tech initiatives into the more traditional way of working that we as non-techies within the democracy support community are more used to. And it's not only us that do that, a lot of our members do that around the world, and a lot of our members that are not from the civic tech community, but they have realized that these actors are powerful actors and that they can really have an added value within more conventional programming.
Thanks a lot for that. I'm sure we'll come back. There's some interesting, I think, similarities and differences, I think, between the organizations we're hearing from, which are quite interesting. But I am seeing some common threads, whether it's around a focus on ecosystems as with the first two, or a more methodological approach? There's some thought as to what one is trying to do tactically in what I'm hearing you say, but also I think similar between you and Hawa is this idea around these collaboratives. So thank you so much for that. Claudia, I want to bring you in, and what's exciting about that is, in fact, I haven't really tracked substantively what areas you've been getting into in your work, but I know that a lot of it has centered around the uses of data and data technologies in enabling that. So I'm quite keen to hear from you in the work that you've been doing. What are we learning about the role of users, if you want, of some of these digitals in various application areas? And I know that your work maybe is more north than maybe some of the other speakers so far. But so Claudia, maybe if you just talk about
you're breaking up a little bit on my end.
Issues. Am I breaking up?
No, now I think you're good. No, yeah, I got the question. Thank you, Geci. Yeah, no, I think it's the work that I have been doing has been focused on a specific part of the ecosystem that everybody has already touched on. So that there has been the clear focus for me on data technology, and that has really been the lens how grantees and partners have been selected. So not by theme necessarily, kind of looking at climate change or looking at health or looking at kind of efforts to support democracy and good governance, but really focusing on how can the capacity of nonprofits increase to use data and data technology, with the clear recognition that data and the data work itself is only a means to an end. But I think in terms of nonprofits, harnessing the potential of these tools for different themes, I think is a critical aspect. But maybe even more importantly related to this conversation, my personal opinion is that when organizations, are using these tools and these approaches to also be able to really then understand and inform dialogue around how these tools should be used more generally. I think one of the challenges that civil societies or civil society organization face is they are very early in their data journey. When I have spoken with these organizations, they are not as far along as many of the corporations. And so the understanding of what is possible with technology, positively, but certainly also negatively, I think is one that I've been hoping to increase with the work that I've been doing. In terms of themes, you were asking about the themes, Geci. It's been a kind of spanning a broad range. The most recent cohort, some of the work took place in cohorts or kind of using peer learning efforts, which I think is something that might be worth looked into more and replicated more, because again, a lot of those nonprofit organizations find themselves in similar spots. I often have the experience when I speak to nonprofit organizations and they're telling me about their challenges, that those challenges are truly not unique. A lot of nonprofit organizations are in similar spots. And so bringing them together and also facilitating or providing platforms where nonprofits can help each other and learn together, I think is very useful. And the latest of those cohorts focused on climate change. The next one that will run in 2023 is focusing on human rights. The one in 21 was focused on equality. There, I've tackled with the team questions like financial inclusion, police violence, and others. Some of the more recent examples that could be interesting here as part of the climate change cohort looked into how can public procurement data be used to highlight where public investments are not benefiting the most vulnerable populations. There were 2 examples in that cohort, one focusing on Honduras, the other one in India, in the state of Assam, looking at kind of flooding, areas that are affected by flooding and landslides, and where is public infrastructure money really going, looking at public procurement data and combining that with other socioeconomic factors, and satellite imagery. So that was an interesting, or 2 interesting examples. And I think that I could see increasing interest in using public procurement data in that way. Other work has been focused on informing governments around policy decisions. So those were some of the examples that are relevant here. Often it is an education effort on kind of all around. I feel a lot of funders are still new to the data space in particular, and data technology space particular, kind of understanding what's required in terms of the people that are needed, kind of the infrastructure, cloud computing, if that is relevant, but also on the side of governments. That's probably an experience everybody on the panel has. Kind of what does the demand side look like if nonprofits kind of are creating new data sets or new data tools or new means of creating insights? Are people in government or people who are making decisions, are they kind of able to run with that and take actions on that? So those are some of the other challenges that I've seen in this space, and that I've seen funders like the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation and others addressing. I think I'll stop there.
No, actually, please don't stop. The one thing I wondered, with the kinds of organizations you're working with, and when you talk about this education or capacity building effort, is it often, maybe talk about the kinds of organizations you're dealing with? So maybe among us here, we have a sense of what we mean by the civic tech organizations. But do you find, are those typically, if you want, traditional not-for-profits that are in a domain of work and they're starting to take on digital approaches, or are these new actors, sort of digital first actors, who are trying to engage with issues? Is it a mix? What kinds of organizations do you largely engage with?
It is truly a mix. I mean, so there are the ones that I would describe as digital natives, and so their business model was built around kind of new technologies. There's an organization in Uganda that, as part of my work at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, I've been working with SOTSO in Uganda, kind of looking at waste, and there have been others. There are the flying labs around kind of drone information and others. A lot of the organizations, I think that make up the kind of the pool of grantees, but also of organizations that are seeking support, are more in the research area, because they traditionally have kind of more years of experience using data to inform policy. So they are the first who are thinking about data in kind of even more strategically and have real interest in combining different data sets. So typically, and they have the resources, they might have a data analyst, a data scientist on staff, or someone who kind of trained to become something akin to that. And so those are probably 2 types of organizations that we are seeing. It's interesting that a lot of the more traditional kind of INGOs and larger scale NGOs, I think for a lot of these organizations, it's still early days. And I think one of the challenges that they are seeing, because they are often kind of larger organizations, using data and using data differently is a cultural issue within an organization. It's kind of an organizational, cultural aspect. It requires that type of culture change. And for a lot of kind of existing, especially larger scale organizations, that is hard to realize. I always like to talk about kind of data use as an organizational competency. It's less about, do I have that team here somewhere that, of 3 people who do data? It's really something that needs to be threaded through organizations to kind of understand what's possible, but also what are the potential harms and what needs to be taken into account.
Which is then part of that broader, and I think maybe links to Stan's point about seeing technology more holistically as well. So understanding that there are those dimensions as well where capacity needs to be built, and that culture shifting, I suppose, is that as well. We do have in our context maybe where there is the buy-in and the understanding of the need to do things differently, but sometimes with an optimism that can ignore, if you want, some of the downsides around the technology.
I feel that is kind of. I've heard the same thing in the north. So it's. I think a lot of people started. When I look back at the last 5 years that I have been in the space, really in year 1, it was very early days. It was almost hard to find grantees who could use some of the kind of the technical assistance that we could provide, particularly around cloud computing. So when you really talk about much larger data sets and more complex data sets, I feel now 5 years later, I can definitely see progress in the space overall, even though progress has been slow. But at the same time, the interest in data governance approaches and how to implement and do better data governance internally is definitely coming much more to the forefront. So people have had first experiences using data, and now they are realizing, well, we have to set ourselves up in a different way to really ensure that we are not that there are not unintended consequences, or as few unintended consequences as possible, and that we are very clear around how we are stewarding our data as we are collecting more and as we get more sophisticated in using data.
No, thank you for that. And I think it's actually promising and helpful to hear you say that progress is being made. Yesterday, there was a conversation with civic tech people from Latin America. And one of the comments they made, and I think it's something we're seeing here as well, is a push towards focusing more on these issues of data governance, of ethics, of security and that sort of thing, which is good on the one hand, but there was a sense from her that it's a bit late in the day because people are already making progress on those issues, but some of the issues that they're dealing with actually still need attention, and so how to get that balance right. Okay, thank you very much for this. We're now getting to where I want to definitely bring the rest of the audience in, but I want to do that as well as centering, all of you have promised to come back to the issue of how sustainability can be attained by the range of organizations that try to work in this space. The one thing that was quite evident in the panel this morning is that it's quite a vast a community of actors. So when we say civic tech, even this morning, we had examples of a 2-person show doing amazing work in Egypt, and then fairly large, more sophisticated organizations that are working in the civic tech space. And so the issues, I think, both in terms of their capacity to operate at particular funding levels, but also the capacity to partner when you're very small or when you're very big. I think also what's come up in what I've picked up from your engagements here is that I think there can be tactics and approaches that, for example, can work with maybe even in government, but there are other approaches that can't, because either of the nature of the government or because of the nature of the issue people are working on. So that idea that partnering with government is a viable way to address at least the financing side is, again, a bit of a mixed bag. So I'm just trying to problematize where many organizations are finding themselves and why they're so pressed around the funding issue. And so I just want to open the space for all of you to begin thinking about how you might advise people to think about how they really attract funding. You know, the other comment we heard from Latin America is they kind of went through their boom and bust period already, where there was big funds, Civic, and then by and large it fell away, and we felt like we are right behind them in terms of the kinds of noises we're hearing, and so we're obviously looking for some advice on that. So that's just an open question to all of you. We've also got some questions coming in. I see a question from Gabriela here around how we can embed data and risk assessments in agile contexts so that developers don't get scared. So I guess that could be for anybody. Claudia, you might want to take a crack at it, but I think anybody else might also have a view on this one. So maybe let's take the questions and then come back to the broader questions around funding strategies. Anybody for this one?
I can take a crack at it, and I don't know if I have the answer. I also want to make sure that I understand the question correctly, but I think one point to highlight here is for me the importance of data leadership. So as part of that work, I really came to understand that the most important person to have within an organization, probably more important than the data analyst or the data scientist, is who is setting the vision for the organization from, in my case, when I kind of see it through the data lens, for kind of data work and data technology, so that there is a clear vision and a clear roadmap. And I feel that could be a means to avoid surprises. I think it relates also back to the kind of the sustainability aspect of the conversation. I think one thing, a question that I've often gotten is, where do we find the talent that we need to do this kind of work? And equally important, how can we retain that talent? And my answer now, after, again, 5 years in the space, is people will leave. I think everything that I've seen is retention is a problem. People leave. They might stay around for 2 years or so, and they move on, because there's so much, that labor market for data people, data professionals, is so dynamic that it is a challenge for nonprofit organizations to keep those people on board. So I almost want to encourage nonprofit organizations to think about how can you plan with that in mind. So you need a longer term plan, and you need to kind of assume that people, kind of will leave, and that you then are able to kind of replace that and kind of continue to work on that. So those are some thoughts related to the question and the broader conversation.
I'm just looking to see if any other panelist wants to comment on this one. I'll also give Gabriela permission to build on it if she wants to go deeper on it. No, okay. So let's come back to this issue. So we've got all of these civic techers out here. We're trying to do these things. We're getting interesting signals, I think, now from Stan and Hawa about how we could think about these in ecosystem modes. We're hearing the words learning coming up, some tactical ideas, but the reality is many of them are just struggling with funding themselves from year to year. What insights do you have from the way people approach you, and maybe what you also observe in the space about how people could be thinking about surviving in this funding landscape? So this is the tough question, huh?
Yes, it's a tough question, and actually it doesn't come from civic tech only. It's I think it's a challenge across the board with the shrinking of the funding landscape, with economic crisis and its impact, on capacity and donors' portfolio pocket money, especially our types of private foundations. But I think there are, sorry for the noise, but I think there are, there are some ways out. We have talked about linkages, building synergies. What we have done, or what we have supported a lot in the course of our work, is really building synergy between what civil society organizations do, and how civic tech, for instance, can plug into some of the work. During COVID, we have seen many projects, many civic initiatives trying to provide very practical solutions on variety and range of issues, and I think civic innovation was, at this on the African continent, at the heart of the way state, and communities tackled COVID. So which means that, beyond the very narrow funding landscape of foundations like others, there are other ways to harness and to diversify sources of resources for civic tech. But coming back to civil society, we have had many initiatives that bring together, civil society, civic tech, artists, and in a way to tackle in a holistic way issues that, or challenges that are that we are facing, whether in the governance or at community level, etc., etc. And I see there even a way of addressing the shortcomings of civil society's approach. Some of the issues that Claudia was talking about. About civil society not being enough embedding in data, not embedding in innovation, not embedding enough technology to amplify, but also to scale up some of their work. So that, I think, that is a room. There is a room there for providing more platform and more channels for civic techs and civic innovation hubs, to show how they can how they can help civil society organization or NGOs or governments or whatever to better deliver on their mandate. And looking at civic tech themselves, I think the good thing for us, at least in the course of our strategy, because also we interrogate our funding models, we interrogate the way we approach supporting the field. Some of the things we are looking at, and that we are, at least at the level of Open Society Africa, going to work to approach differently, is how we can have some kind of long-term view, long-term support, multi-year support, more flexible support, and less strained, support, especially to non very formal types of organization or civil society organization. And if you want to support innovation, you need to tailor, approaches that are aligned and that will, be creating conducive environment for testing ideas, for failing and taking learning, failing as learning. What Stan was saying, we talk about impact because, we have to be accountable, we have to show the results, we have to, but at the same time, we are working on embedding learning, a lot of learning in our approaches, and learning for impact, but also learning as a way of making sure that as much as, yes, we have to show results, but also showing results is also being able to test, and being able, and sometimes some of the civic, or some of the innovation don't deliver on the expectation, but it should be fine, because if you don't test, if you don't take risk, we want to go, we want to explore what are the possibilities there. And this is something that is very much embedded in our new strategy and in our new approaching work. And we think, we want to support an ecosystem of African innovation that is in itself, has value just as an ecosystem of African innovation, but also, and that would be how do you call it? Nice on the cake. What is it in the cake? If they can help to deliver on very specific needs and on a very specific, and the same, like for instance, when you talk about art and culture in their own value, as part of the open society, but also art and culture or innovation and tech for open society goals. So both as an end in itself, but also as a mean or as a tool for positive social transformation.
Oh, this is so heartwarming. When you talk about supporting the ecosystems just for their own value, and actually achieving the anticipated result as the icing on the cake. That's such a beautiful metaphor. So I do have one question, and we can come back to it later, which has to do with size. I'm pretty sure I'm not interpreting it correctly, because you do talk about supporting less formal entities. But I wonder, with this ecosystem approach, and maybe Stan, you can come in here as well, because you also speak of this ecosystem approach. Does this begin to make size matter? Are you talking about bigger, fancier, sophisticated players who can ecosystem build, or is there room for Geci and her one-person show?
Was that to me?
Yes. Well, you don't have to answer about my private enterprise, but yes, on the point.
Yeah, I think on the size piece, not necessarily. I think I can give some live examples to speak to that. I think Hawa's mentioned most of the comments about what works in our space. I always have to be careful about saying what works to get funding, because I sit on the other side. My challenges are not as live. I don't have to worry about payroll. So let's have empathy for the people who do the work, who have to build organizations. But I think the privilege and the benefit I have having sat on this other side is that we're lucky to be arbiters of information. I think just to be able to see what has worked in different places and what hasn't worked, I think has been a massive learning for me. And I think over the last maybe 5 years, having worked in this space, the things that have always showed up are it's a lot harder to chase funding. I always find that organizations that have clarity about the teams they're building, have clarity about their strategy and what they're going to be doing in terms of learning and impact, have a much longer trajectory. And then there's a piece which we always shy away from, I think, just around communications and outreach. It's one thing to do amazing work, but people have to know about it. And we've done a lot of work pushing organizations to be a bit more public through events like this, through little things like just disseminating information. The irony is a lot of groups that we find in civic tech have terrible websites. You have no idea what they do. And I can call out Gabriella, who's on this call at Open Up, who've done some fairly incredible work just around rebranding, getting a bit more clarity about what they say, doing a lot of work on comms, using blogs, using different media to communicate. Because a lot of the times the work that we do is very highbrow, very technical, and not very easy to understand. There's not a shortage of money in the world. I always say there's a shortage of good ideas, but the ideas have to be communicated. People have to understand what is being done and in a way that is relatable to them. So I think teams, clarity about strategy, but the piece around comms is something which I think we have to do a bit more of. Because I always say my biggest fear is when my boss calls me and says, "Why are you not funding them?" Which means he's found out about this organization through other platforms, through other people, and I never knew about them, which I think is a good thing to happen, which means they've been public, people know what they're doing, and good stories tell, and they travel. So I think those three things have been critical in my learning over the last few years. I'll add a piece on sustainability as well. I think Claudia and Hawa both mentioned the challenge of running non-for-profits. And I think there's a piece to be said about diversifying revenues. and getting earned revenue. So much as a lot of us are funded by donors and driven by philanthropic capital, there is a space to do work as well that is revenue generating. If you have amazing technologists, people who are building things, there's people in other spaces who need that. And I think South Africa is amazing the way that that ecosystem works. Whereas we fund a lot of groups that we find out are working together, and the work is paid for by those organizations, which I think is either through consulting, through building platforms. There's ways in which you can diversify your revenues, which allows you to attract market talent because you can pay slightly more, but also insulates you from those funding cycles when people like OSF and Luminate go through strategic cycles and decide that something is being deprioritized. It insulates you a bit more during those cycles. So I think that is also something which we can work together to do a bit more of. And I think push the funders. If you need more money for comms, you need more money to build teams and build capacity, I think it's something that people should not shy away from asking, because creaky doors get greased. If we are quiet and not being public about the challenges we're facing, it becomes a bit harder for us to direct support to where it's needed. So yeah.
Hawa, I see your hand up.
Yeah, if I can piggyback just of what Stan was saying, because I had it on my notes, the communication piece, and really encourage civic techs. I think most of the times the innovators, the civic tech world, they're like, very much in a bubble. They assume that people know what they are doing, and most of the time there are these brilliant ideas, these brilliant innovations there, but not known, effectively, and even not taken to another level, and when I always say about a level, the applicability, how can you scale up? How can you take it further? How can it make it, in useful, for communities or for whatever user is out there. So I think communication for me is might be, or in my perception, a low point, and that need to be worked on. And as Stan said, don't assume that donors know. We don't. Many a time we don't know. And in some instances we might know what we don't know, but in many instances we don't even know what we don't. So don't never assume that donors know, and push donors, as he said, on. And fortunately, OSF is very much into that. Is really the health of organization, investing in the health of in building the field. There is, trying to move away from project-based support and to more programmatic, organization-based support. And really, I think we need to be pushed. There's no reason to for even if it is at the level of a project, because civic tech can have different size. Not all civic techs have, you have different size, and our systems should be able to adapt to these sizes, in terms of what we request, in terms of sourcing proposals, in terms of reporting guidelines, in terms of, and we need to be pushed even harder on that, but there is a need for us to be more mindful, as I was saying earlier, on the specificities, of that tech world, and to adapt. It's up to us, for me. As much as, we are all fine with the values, the principles, accountability principles, and it's up to us to adapt and to make sure that our systems and our processes are tailored, to respond to the needs, to the nature, but also and to the very, very specificities of many of these partners on the front line there.
Thanks for that.
Partners shouldn't assume that we just know, and many a times we don't know. And if we are not challenged, we are not pushed, we are not asked for, we might not just address some obvious thing for some, across the board, but for us that might not be always very obvious.
Nice, nice. So again, pushing on this communications, we've got to make sure we can be seen. Leon, you also had some ideas around the issue of sustaining organizations. Do you want to come in here?
Yes, thank you, Geci. I'll use Stan's imagery a bit on being learning through the funding cycle, which is very much where we are still at. So we're not very much established in the space. So we're going through our first rounds of programming. But I am hugely interested also in this sort of revenue generation aspect of what Stan was mentioning also. However, for us, it's too early to say how successful, our support that we give in sort of financial and also technical will lead to revenue generation. There's one grantee that is able to sort of make a revenue from the analysis of data that it generates through the site. That's a sort of citizen feedback tool, where then the information that comes back through the tool from the citizens can be used for sort of consultancies to learn about what citizens react positively to or negatively to. So we have some individual cases, but it's very much too early for us to say how successful that can be or has been. You've mentioned, Geci, the government partnership and how that can be a mixed bag, and I do agree. Obviously, it depends very much on the context, but I still believe that one of my, at least haven't worked in a civic tech initiative, but as a sort of a program partner, a grant maker in some cases, one of the huge selling points that I can see is that if civic tech initiatives can demonstrate that they have worked successfully with a policymaker or a government institution, and that they have developed a solution where such type of partnership was fruitful, that works in the favor, I think, to donors, but also potentially if there's funding available with that same partner in the country that could potentially sustain the partnership through that. And then maybe thirdly, aside from this revenue generation, the government partnership, and then thirdly, the donor landscape, the sort of funders that some of us all are. I've said initially that I know the European Union quite well in terms of the funding structure. I've, in preparation for the session, I've just went back to look and check their recent programmatic documents where their civic tech is mentioned in the documents, and it's not mentioned as a phrase as such, but there is some moderate mentioning of using digital tools and technologies for increasing democracy. There's a lot of wariness on the negative effects, and that has been mentioned today before as well. But there's a recognition of the fact that civic tech or digital solutions can enhance democracy support programming. And so my recommendation then would be to explore that, to explore funding streams that don't look like they're very techy, but that may accommodate civic tech solutions. So it's a bit similar to what Hawa was saying of breaking the bubble, maybe going out from, I think you'll do well speaking to Open Society and Luminate, but there's other donors that may also support, even though it may be a bit more further down the chain. You may have to enter into a partnership with a traditional civil society organization, and through that apply for a grant or for a proposal, and that may allow you to develop a particular aspect of the tool that you've been working on or so. So I think this breaking the bubble a bit is a good recommendation, because from my modest experience, the two communities don't know each other so well sometimes. It also, maybe there's sometimes an age factor where, older staff members within don't necessarily relate so much, and then vice versa. I don't know. But I think from what I've seen is that there's lots of more synergies to be made within any type of context between those, two actor groups, and that could be beneficial for both.
And I'd really like to come back to that point, especially just in a minute or so when we engage with a question Richard is asking, because I think there's something there that's also related to learning. But Claudia, I want to come to you. One fair question, maybe one unfair question. The fair question would be that you've obviously been in the space of looking beyond financial support to technical capacity building. Some of the points that people are raising here around whether it's communications as a way to be seen better, or how you can commercialize aspects of your service or your data to get some revenue. Are these sorts of things that exist in that package of technical support and capacity building, or are they beyond? And then the maybe unfair question is, we've heard suggestions about partnering with government, we've heard suggestions around developing new revenue generating options, the donor landscape. Nobody's mentioned yet. What about the private sector? What about, and whether it's CSI or corporate money? And I'm curious whether you have a view or experience into some of what might be happening there, and opportunities or risks.
I think both very fair questions. Let me start with the latter, because I was thinking about that as I was listening to my fellow panelists, and I would think about that as blended finance, and I think that is something that probably any nonprofit needs to apply, and it speaks to I think the things that were already mentioned: unrestricted funding, then project-based funding, but every funder, and I think we all know that, has their own lens, has their own interests, has their own strategies. We heard it today. And so the question for the nonprofit, I think, is to think about, what is it that you want to do? Where are you now? What do you want to do kind of in a year's time, in a 2 years' time? And who is going to fund different components of it? Because different funders fund different pieces. And so the in-kind contribution is one element that I've seen some nonprofits use very well. And there are a couple of factors, and that is the kind of something that the private sector often provides. So the private sector, there are discounts around software or kind of tooling, or maybe even donations. And sometimes these packages also come with in-kind contribution of a volunteer. And I think there are elements. I think one positive development that I've seen in this space is that I think there is what's happening is, I think that the time periods for those volunteers have grown longer on average, because I think everybody has realized that this 2 weeks on a Friday afternoon doesn't help anybody, and it really doesn't contribute to anything. And so there are more fellowships and secondments, particularly in kind of attached to some of the larger tech companies. So I think that's a good development. The other piece is, I think, again, coming back to my strategy that I talked about earlier, having that vision, having that roadmap. One thing that I've seen some nonprofits play well is, so you receive a grant from one tech company for a technology donation, and you can use that tool for free, let's say for a year or something like that. And then, of course, that at some point that comes to an end. I mean, like with any grant or any donation, it comes to an end. And I think some I've seen being very aware of the fact that that is happening, and having then clarity what could be a follow-on, so that you are not kind of going off the cliff at that moment, but that you are thinking about, you have a specific need that is at the moment addressed by a specific tool. So those are some of the elements. So overall, I think the private sector, that is a lot where the private sector plays. I mean, some, of course, also make grants, Microsoft, Google, and others. I don't know if there's anything else you want me to say there. And then I want to come back to your first question, which unfortunately I'm now blanking on.
Okay, on this one, maybe I'd like to talk about risks. So you've mentioned one, which is obviously the period ending. Do you see any other in your environment conflicts, or I mean, just even, for example, around some of what we were talking about earlier, around some of the digital sort of rights and privacy and other issues, which of course many of these same corporations face a lot of challenges around. So I don't know if those are risks you see, or if these are well in hand and people can comfortably work with some of these corporates. But the second question was about the technical support you give and whether it begins to speak to some of these issues people were raising around being more visible, being able to communicate to funders and being visible to them, also being able to think about how to generate revenue streams.
Yeah, there is a lot there. Let me start by focusing on the risks for the organizations themselves. So I think something that I've definitely seen is organizations are looking around, are seeking funding, are seeking help in whatever way they can get it. And then they are accepting corporate donations, and they haven't done a deep enough investigation. Is this really the tool that they need? Is this really addressing their needs? And are there lock-in factors? So kind of to what extent are they tied then to this technology, and they have a hard time getting out of it? And at some point, costs are incurred, and service fees maybe are asked for. So that is one, I think, really thinking internally about organizations. And I mean, every funder is different. Every tech corporation is different. And I think it's really about investigating what are the terms of a donation, for example, and having as clear as possible an idea of what does the nonprofit really want to get out of this relationship, and what would be truly beneficial, and what are also potential risks. So that is one. I think the other question that you raise around privacy and corporate behavior, I mean, I feel is a very different question in many ways. So it's not the first one is maybe a business question. So what are kind of as a donor, what is the relationship between the corporate and an entity in and of itself? But the other one is really a societal question. What are these organizations doing, and how are they using their technology and their power, and to what extent is that regulated or even clear? I mean, I feel that is a question that really then goes to a much more broader policy, the broader policy environment.
Thanks a lot for that, Claudia. I'm going to come back to you still on the kinds of TA when you think about TA. But Stan, I think you have some views on these partnership arrangements.
Yeah, and less views. We have a team or a program called Partner Support that has been informed a lot by grantees, and this was more to give real-time support outside the funding decisions. So one of the benefits is that we've been giving long-term grants for maybe 2 or 3 years, which is a good thing, but it means that you have limited space to be responsive when different events happen. So we've had COVID, we've had organizations have challenges with financial management. Some of them have gone through transitions, some very well, others not, setting up governance structures. And I think it's one of those things which comes with growth. Growth is painful many times and it's unpredictable. But if we can find ways to support during that period, we find that to be extremely useful. So I'm sharing something on the link there that says this a bit more eloquently than I have. But yeah, it's real-time support. It's both financial and non-financial. So the non-financial bits are either through networks. We've been quite deliberate before COVID about having events. I think there's a picture on that website that has Richard, who's on this call, and Adi, who was at Open Up before this. And I think the feedback was, we like you guys as funders, but we learn more from other organizations than we do from you, which was a bit painful. But we can facilitate for them to have events for 2 or 3 days where leaders can share the challenges they're facing. speak about their learnings, and that has been critical for us. So we're hoping to go back to doing a bit more of that with COVID having come to an end, I hope. But a lot of this, I say again, has been informed by feedback from grantees. So I think just come to us with the challenges you're facing when you're facing them. But yeah, the link there probably says a bit more. We have a team of, I think, 4 globally now that are dedicated to doing both financial and non-financial. And we've borrowed a lot from other foundations. Through OSF, I know Ford has a massive program called Build. We have less money, but we're a bit more flexible, and we're trying to learn through that as well. So yeah, thanks, Gabby.
Oh my, okay. Now, maybe this is a good segue, even though I think there's more we could discuss here, to the learning point. So Richard, who has just been mentioned, raises on the chat a question about the learning point. So I think a number of you have talked about the importance of learning. And so Richard asks, how can we as organizations better keep up to date with learnings and outcomes from programs supported by the funders? There is, obviously in terms of learnings, there's a unique view in terms of a funder's perspective. So in a way, bringing back the learning question to you, and I'll add a bullet point to that after maybe we've had a chance to comment on this one. So how can organizations learn what you're learning?
It's a very good question. Coincidentally, I have no team, so we are in a retreat right now, doing strategy retreat, and we were discussing this morning this point learning. Yeah, actually, as you know, learning is hard there because again, with scarcity of resources, we have also is that okay, are we putting our money the right place? Is it yielding the desired results? I will try not to say impact. It's a disputed, contested concept, and I very much agree on that. But are we on the right track? And we try to embed learning, and the learning we see it at 2 levels. The one is, the organizational wide strategy, what are learning frameworks and tools, and that help us, as Stan, just to what Stan was saying, learning from supporting, learning from our funding, and it in ways of it help us see where are the potential for success, where are the shortcomings in our own approach, but also where we can support better partners. And that's where the second level of learning comes in, which is a learning from the partner. And for us, it's a two-way thing, but also it's a kind of let's say interactive, mutually feeding process. We are not just when we support a field, when we support an organization, when we support an issue, we believe it's because we have a meeting point between us as an organization, as a donor, pursuing a given mission, and then having strategic goals. We have meeting point with what our goals, what our strategies are, and what our ambition are on the issues with the one of the partner, and we see that we are not advancing on those strategic as long as the partner is not advancing on them. So the learning we are trying to do is what results we are trying to have for ultimately the issues we want to impact on. Sorry for using the word impact. It's not, but the impact we want to on, and we want to make sure that we with our partners, we create a safe space, where we can share, where we can dispute, where we can discuss what we think is emerging from our mutual mutual investment. And when I say investment, it's, physical, moral, financial, intellectual, whatever. You invest because you believe in a certain cause. And many a times what we try, we might want to be, you might sort of sometimes be trapped into the desire to show that, we are relevant, the desire to show that we are making progress, and hence justify why we are out there, our very existence. What we ultimately, our learning is open, to partners. Our learning is for the communities we want to serve in, because our learning is nothing else than how we are better placed or how we are better equipped for achieving the desired common results that we have, believing and going from the premises that whatever we want to do is informed by what actually both the community out there and the partner out there, find relevant and is relevant to them and is mutually agreed upon as things that we want to do for some, whatever change we want to have out there. So it's just to reiterate that many a times, I think, at least at the level of OSF, we just until recently we are not very much, into publicizing, going out there. This is, we are very much relying on what the terrain is giving us as what the partners are putting out there as being their learnings, and there's this learning with our learning. But more and more we are embedding and building in learning frameworks to better just drive the data we generate, the learning we generate to enhance and to make our programming even more relevant and more responsive to the need of the field and to the need of the communities we seek to serve.
Thank you so much, Hawa. Just a quick one. On the issue of this learning you do with the partners, is it just bilateral, so with each individual partner, or do you, like Caroline's making a comment on the chat, that it would be useful if it was focus groups because they also want to learn among each other? Do you do anything like that as well?
It takes various forms. There is a bilateral one, but also just providing spaces, and platforms for partners, for us to learn, but also for partners to learn from one another. This sometimes very much we are doing more. We have, like, for instance, partners forums around, let's say, corruption, anti-corruption work, or partners forum around climate justice, or just given issues or approaches, or how we can better use art and culture, how we can use creative activism, or how technology can better help deliver, on the desire change. So it's bilateral, but also it's creating platforms or facilitating platforms for organization, to learning platform, I would say.
Super. No, thank you so much. I want to come to Claudia on this one, but I see we are to our last 15 minutes. What I'm going to do is also to invite us, in addition to commenting on this point about learning, which I think is emerging as very important for all of us, to also invite you to maybe begin also offering your closing remarks. So what are some, so remembering that who we've got out here and what funding. So I just want to ask you to, oh, did I freeze for a moment? Sorry, I think it's the storm that's coming, but I think I'm back now. So just to encourage you to also make your closing remarks. So whether it's your words of encouragement or your words of advice to people out there who are trying to figure out how to not shut down by the end of this year. Claudia, I'm coming to you on the learning point and then inviting your closing remarks as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Geci. And it was a true pleasure to be here. On the learning point, I want to say Richard is too kind to us, framing this as an obligation on the side of nonprofit organizations. So what can they do to better keep up? I feel this is really an obligation that funders have, because funders do have a unique vantage point in terms of often a view to a much broader ecosystem than the individual nonprofit might have, or from a kind of also from a different perspective. And so sharing that, I think more often, and certainly beyond bilateral conversation, I think is an obligation that I think most funders are not meeting, and where we need to do better. I think the other aspect that I wanted to raise here, which I think is true for data and data technology, but probably for civic tech more generally, is, building money, if you're not already doing it, building money into a grant for really good documentation, and also kind of making sure that documentation is happening where it is possible, where those, where that information is open source, that it's available on GitHub or other platforms, because I feel that is critical. And it's often not happening in terms of good work is happening, but it's beyond the blog post that declares success. I think it's very hard to really find information on what truly happened and how the work was being done. My closing comments, to keep those short, I think the civic tech space in particular, in light of what we are seeing as threats to democracy and closing space or shrinking space for civil society, is a very critical space. I think, the level of, we haven't talked about disinformation and misinformation once during these conversations, but with, kind of elections coming up in the States just at the beginning of November, but, elections happening everywhere. I think it is, this is a very critical space and will only become more important. So would encourage everyone who's on the call to kind of keep up the good work. And I think it's truly needed, and it will be needed even more. So this is a space that is still early, and I think where we will see a lot more need and a lot more need for innovative solutions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Claudia, for that encouragement. So it's important work. There are ideas here and suggestions about how we can build our capacity to stay on. Maybe I'll just keep going in reverse and come to you, Leon, in terms of any closing remarks. And I kind of popped one onto the chat already that referred to a comment you had made that I thought was interesting, which was to do with learning and whether we learn enough.
Yeah, thanks, Geci. I can't answer that question whether civic tech initiatives are learning enough. Maybe just one comment of what we usually try to prioritize when we do our learning processes. We focus on behavioral change of our target groups. So that's something that we'll also be doing in the context of the programs that I've mentioned before, and see where among those that we're trying to address somehow, where we're trying to change behavior towards democracy, has the civic tech initiative made a difference. And so that's not so much focused on the learning within the technology. That's a bit outside of our scope. But at least then how it relates back to the sort of political system, that's what we like to focus on. In terms of a closing remark, I'll be just very short and maybe rehash some of the things I've said already. I think I would encourage those who are very techy and sort of these digital natives, as it was phrased beforehand already, to reach out and try to build alliances with more traditional civil society organizations and also more traditional donors. I think there are opportunities there. If you do that, then I would probably think it's wise to keep your long-term vision, but nevertheless try to package some of the things that you can do with your solution as sort of quick wins and something that reminds a bit of an output or a product that can be sort of inserted into a larger project logic while not compromising on the long-term vision that you have for your initiative. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Leon. Appreciating those comments. Hawa, if I could come to you for closing remarks.
Yeah, just reiterate what I think Leon said about building alliances beyond the civic tech, showcasing what we talked about earlier, the communication aspect. I think what Caroline, I think it's Caroline, said in the chat, and as much as you can go in for donor-driven spaces or platforms for learning, but at the same time, I see the CTIN for the great space of learning, of showcasing what civic tech are doing. But how much is out there? How much is publicized about it beyond the civic tech community itself or the usual suspect, like the donor, taking it out and making sure that there is sharing of knowledge, sharing of practices, and coming back to donors. I think we value a lot hearing from you guys, from partners, from the field, especially about where we are failing or where we are not meeting, your needs or your expectations. It always helps us, again, going back to what Stan said at the beginning, learning for money, we don't know. We try to do our best, but we don't always know. But there is we expect our partner, to challenge us a lot because it helps us do better. We are out here and for the partners, for the work. Without the partners, without you guys on the field, we are not relevant. We cannot do the things you do. I truly believe that we occupy the easiest. We are at the easiest spot of the chain. So the hard work is from you guys, and building when you write proposals, all what Claudia said about communications, about learning, about project management, because that's how the work is not being done by it has you need conditions, being in the right conditions to do that work. Diversify, try to see, diversifying sources of funding. I don't want to be long because you don't have enough time, but I think many of the things came up during the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think it's always useful to have those messages emphasized. So thank you so much, Hawa. Stan, if we can close out with you.
Thanks again for having us. Closing remarks. I think to also remember to celebrate operational successes. I think I've also learned that we do a ton of time celebrating programmatic successes and the work that we do as organizations. But I think evidenced by the number of people on this call, there's a lot of work that has been done by CSOs, by civic tech organizations to remain alive and to remain sustainable through building teams, through building those networks. And that is something which I think we should all take a lot of pride in. That a space has been built. I think 10 years ago, there was not a community of practice. There was lack of knowledge. And I think through building those teams, through disseminating information, but also just having this collective, there's evidence that something is working and there's something which is being created and evolving, which I think is a lot of credit to the people who are gathered on this in this room today, but also the broader event at Jamfest. So yeah, I think just to pause to also celebrate that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that, Stan, and to our panelists. I think we probably could have gone on. I obviously didn't encourage people to raise too many additional questions, but I think this is a really important start, and there's some really useful gems I think we've gotten here. So first of all, this comment that in a way, some of the issues we are facing are not unique to civic tech, that some of them are broader issues that whether it's around this, funding is getting tighter. So there are issues facing civil society space more widely, not-for-profit space. I think that's an important recognition and maybe speaks to the need to also look over the fence and learn from other people. But yes, we are still needed. I think Claudia tells us the need may even grow more. And so our time is not up. We have to keep pushing. However, there are shifts, and we've heard today about a move towards ecosystem approaches. We've been told about learning approaches, which are very core to a lot of innovation theory, my other hat. So if you think about innovation, it's all about learning. I think all our funders are telling us that's the mode they're in. New data capabilities and the non-financial support that's available out there for us to really build capabilities that themselves may yield new funding streams, but certainly also new capabilities to address these challenging issues. We've had lots of suggestions for things that are within our control to do. We can communicate more and better. We can enter more collaborations and alliances, including beyond our civic tech pool. Everybody has said diversify our funding. And yes, we can look at more donors, including non-sort of civic tech donors, but we can also look at governments, we can look at private sectors, but do your homework. So that's not a blank check there. I think we're also being told to raise our voices to these funders. They want to hear us and they're open to learning themselves. And if I can just end this little bit with just a comment that Hawa made when she said it's a mutual investment. At one point in my life, I worked for a treasury, and we used to keep reminding people that we would have no jobs if there were no recipients of the money. So sometimes I think the donor side is heaven and we are in hell trying to just get some of that funding. But I think this recognition that one doesn't exist without the other. So in a way, that mutuality, I think, is something that's been framed quite nicely for us. So I think let's keep pushing. Thank you so much. We will share this information. We will share this video. We've been invited to engage. I think what's left for me is to thank our panelists, all of you. Thank you so much, Leon, Claudia, Hawa, Stan, for just the time and the generosity of your sharing. I think we really appreciate that. We recognize our participants who are here today and those who might see this later, and Luminate again just for being so generous and brave, I must say. It's not always easy to open yourself up to the potential throwing of stones. Fortunately, none were thrown today. I think we've only benefited from what we've heard. So tomorrow, just coming to closing the session now, is the last day of our CTIF virtual program. So tomorrow morning, we have a session on Let's Talk Data. So lessons learned, building civic tech solutions with Magamba Network. And then also our third and final deep dive on presenting more of the civic tech initiatives that Leon referred to. So that's at 11:30. We have a really cool book talk, our first attempt at a book session tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. Central African time. And it's a book on shifting our relationship with technology in conversation with Afua Bruce, who's from the diaspora. And then in the afternoon, also very exciting and a first time for us, we've got MIT Solve, a team from the lab there sharing with us what they've been doing around community-focused tech entrepreneurship and some of the methods that they're using there. So really an exciting program tomorrow, and we encourage you all to participate. And that's it from my side. That's all we have for this session. Stay on for some music. We must remember to celebrate, as Stan has told us. We always try to celebrate and also just keep ourselves inspired and creative through our creative arts and our creative partners. We'll be closing, therefore, with another beautiful song from Melo Mino, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session. If you're in Johannesburg next week, if you didn't plan to be here, maybe it's a good time to buy a ticket, but it's really expensive right now. But we'll be in Johannesburg having the in-person engagements. That program is online. Join us if you can. Thanks, everybody, and bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.